My name is Joan Lee Welty. I'm one of those few people that's still living that grew up before 1945, before all of our conveniences showed up, and there was a war going on. The war was going on many years before I ever came into the picture here because the United States was the last to get in with the attack on Pearl Harbor. My father was acting very peculiarly the night before Pearl Harbor. His ear was close to a radio and short wave that he was listening to. It was obvious to me as a little girl that something very important was occurring. I had been born in the Depression, so I had never known anything but all the conservative things going on. And when the war hit, it even got more conservative. We not only had the victory gardens, that's what they were called, grew all our own vegetables. You had a hard time getting meat because everything was rationed. They asked us to please save. If we did have some meat and we fried it and there were drippings, we would always save it, put it in an empty coffee can. You would turn it in because they could make bullets out of that. I can only speak as a child at the time, but I can tell you children were very involved. If you had a metal coat hanger even that you didn't use anymore, that was scrap metal. That went for the war effort. If you had an old pot you didn't use anymore, it went for the war effort. Everything went for the war effort. Even a stick of gum had a foil wrapper, and you knew that you were supposed to save the foil wrapper. And I'd bring it home to Mother, and she'd add it to the ball of all the different foil you did with simple things. My mother tried to find a pair of shoes for me for summer because I kept growing, of course, and I grew out of the leather shoes I had. Well, she bought a pair and was very disappointed because the soles wore out in one day because they were only made of reinforced cardboard. There was no leather available, and if you had to have shoes, you had to buy them through your rationing, and you were very limited. So I remember always having my foot measured, and you bought the shoe much bigger so that you could wear it a longer time than was really healthy to wear it. My father was an air raid warden. What did that mean? That meant that my father had to go around whatever region he was assigned, and he had to go house to house and be sure that he saw every night at dusk no lights were showing in any homes in his region, which means we all had to cover our windows in order to turn on any lights at all at night inside our homes. If any lights showed out to the street, the air raid warden would knock on your door and say there's a light showing to take care and blacken it so that it didn't show into the street. During the war, when I went to school, I walked 2 blocks. So every morning I would be looking at the front windows of the houses because most of them had a star in the window. A blue star meant somebody in the family was in the active service. If the star was gold, they had been hit during the war and died. So their star was always gold. I remember a visit from my uncle. He was in the Navy. He came to visit when I was 10 years old. And He was in a sailor suit. He had been on a destroyer. He was also what they called a frogman. Those were people who did undercover work on the destroyer, and then they would swim underwater into a country and take photographs of things. He took photographs of the concentration camps and what was going on. That was secret work toward the end of the war, not the beginning. I had a cousin who was in the Pacific during service. I had my uncle who was on the destroyer. He was in the Atlantic. They did get hit. The destroyer did get hit, and they got hit in a very critical way. It destroyed their ability to have fresh water. And of course, you can't drink the salty ocean water. And all of the engineers aboard could not repair it. In that instant, the admiral got on the speaker and asked for anyone with any technical mechanical knowledge to volunteer to see if they could put their thoughts in on a way to arrange it, because it would take a month at least or more for them to get back home. They needed the fresh water or they wouldn't make it. My uncle was the one that answered the call. In his private life, he was an engineer. He got the water working, so they made it. During the war, all the servicemen, their job was in the service. After the war, they came home. Many of them now, instead of being 18 when they were drafted, they were in their 20s, had missed higher education. This time after the war, we changed. It wasn't after the First World War. We didn't provide. We didn't make that same mistake. After the Second World War, we helped to rebuild Europe, to rebuild England, to rebuild other parts of the world as well as ourselves. This is a cycle that will happen over and over and over again. I'm old enough now to see that it repeats itself. Each generation needs to learn the principles, very often the hard way. If we would just observe carefully, we would start living them each day. We'd be much happier living a simple life.